Look at the wealthiest countries in the world: the US, Japan, Germany, even China and Russia. What is one major environmental similarity they all share? They get snow. It sounds wild, but there is actual data suggesting that average temperature seriously influences a nation's economy. Early on, some successful Asian nations started huge programs just to install air conditioning in government offices, literally cooling their workforce down, specifically to boost productivity and economic output. And hey, those countries are now major global players. So, why exactly are cold countries generally richer? Maybe you have heard this theory before: cold countries face harsher challenges, so the people there have to be smarter, tougher, and better at innovating just to survive. It is that old proverb, "A smooth sea never made a skilled sailor." The thinking goes that people in warmer climates have an easier life, so they did not need to develop advanced intellectual skills just to stay alive. If you glance at a map, it is true, you will not find many wealthy, developed nations sitting right on the equator. But is this theory actually true? Historically, this idea gets slammed immediately. The biggest, most influential civilizations, the early centers of learning and science, actually emerged in warmer regions like the Middle East. Europe only had its technological and intellectual golden age after studying the journals and accumulated knowledge left over from those older, hotter civilizations. And here is the kicker: if you trace back the origin of the theory that cold weather creates superior, smarter people, it was actually proposed by a psychologist who was known to be notoriously biased and, frankly, racist. Other researchers have pointed out that this entire theory is highly selective and intentionally ignores evidence that contradicts it. Plus, just because a place is hot does not mean life is easy. Tropical regions present unique challenges, requiring intense adaptation and ingenuity, too. So if intellectual superiority is not the answer, what is? Another group of scientists argues that environmental conditions do determine a nation's wealth, but it is all about resources and logistics. They suggest that soil fertility, the number of mountains, and average temperature directly impact the resources a country can naturally utilize. Think of it like a strategy video game: the more diverse and easily accessible your starting resources are, the easier it is to get rich. This is the argument often used to explain why Europeans colonized the Americas and not the other way around. Because Europe was geographically closer to ancient hot-climate civilizations, they essentially got a head start on technological development, agriculture, and advanced weaponry. Hold on a minute, because this geography theory also gets major pushback from modern economists. For them, the absolute key to national wealth is not resources, it is governance. They argue that if you have huge reserves of oil or gold but a government that mismanages the money, promotes deep corruption, or suppresses its own citizens, you will never truly develop. In fact, those natural resources might make the population suffer more. Their theory is simple: nations whose governments are transparent, accountable to the people, and have strong legal frameworks will always prosper more. The best example is right next door to each other, North and South Korea. They share the same climate, the same culture, and the same geography, but their systems of government are fundamentally opposite. One is open and participatory, the other is strictly controlled. And clearly, the home of K-pop and global tech companies is far more advanced and wealthy. But even the governance theory has fierce critics who say it completely misses the single biggest factor: history and colonization. Think about many nations that were once colonies. Not only were their resources stripped bare by colonizers for centuries, but after they finally gained independence, some were even forced to pay reparations or independence debt to their former rulers. They were literally compensating the colonizers for the loss of income the colonizers experienced when they had to leave. This crushing debt and structurally unfair economic setup made it almost impossible for these new nations to ever get a firm foothold in the global economy. You see this pattern repeat across much of Africa, where artificial borders and resource exploitation created instability that lasts to this very day. What this shows us is that many things that seem straightforward or scientific are not entirely true. Researchers are human, they have biases and emotions that can definitely influence their findings. There is not one simple answer to why some nations are rich and others are not. It is a messy mix of geography, good governance, and brutal history. The real question now is, when does the next wave of wealth finally hit the places that were structurally left behind?